Internet censorship is a worldwide phenomenon. As technology improves and we are able to process large amounts of data very quickly, many countries have begun to use these advances to selectively control or block the information their citizens or residents are allowed to access over the internet. The ability to selectively censor content is made possible by the structure of the internet. All of our online activities, including the websites we browse, the emails we send to family and friends,
You've got mail.
and the files we download, send data to and from our computers and servers located all over the world. The internet routers used to transmit this information are owned by companies and governments, each of which can modify or block the traffic at will. Even with protections such as encryption or proxies that conceal our data or the services we connect to, advanced machine learning and deep packet inspection techniques can identify the contents or nature of internet traffic based on timing information and data sizes. At the University of Waterloo, we are building systems that thwart internet censorship. We disguise traffic so that it can slip through a country's filters and firewalls. We have recently developed a system called Slovene that takes traffic from an uncensored, overt web page and replaces the images and videos with censored content. Slovene makes censored traffic statistically identical to browsing allowed sites. Slovene not only provides users with content that is blocked in their region, it also protects them by hiding the fact that they are evading their country's censorship policies. By making the internet free and open to bloggers, reporters, and cat enthusiasts around the world, we are fulfilling the ultimate goal of communications technology by promoting the exchange of art, ideas, and perspectives. And so here's a closer look at what's happening. We have this overt user simulator that's going to request a real resource from the overt site. And we have an identifier for the client, an identifier for the stream that it's using, and some SOX Connect request and the initial upstream data from the client. Using this data, the relay station then establishes a connection to the covert site and saves the downstream data in a queue. Okay. And meanwhile, we have forwarded this GET request onto the overt site. And so we're not actually delaying this request more than we have to. The overt site will respond with a resource. And whenever this happens, the relay station will determine whether or not it's a leaf resource and then replace it with the saved downstream data, forwarding it to the client. And so I want to reiterate that each of these resources are, of course, encrypted with this TLS master secret. And while the relay station can decrypt it and look at the contents and possibly change them, from the sensor's point of view, this is just a normal encrypted connection to the overt site. So the sensor is unable to decrypt the data, but what they are seeing are a traffic pattern, so packet sizes, packet timing, sizes of resources that it would normally expect from the overt site.
Hello everyone and welcome to my presentation about Slovene++. My name is Benedikt Birtel and today I will show you some background about Slovene++ and the results of our evaluation. So let's start with an introduction to decoy routing. On the left side, we have a client inside that sensor's domain that would like to browse the web. We assume in this case that sensor uses IP-based blocking. On the right, outside of the sensor's domain, we have two web servers. Uncensored.net can be reached by the censored client, while censored.com is on the blacklist. So when the client tries to establish a connection to censored.com, the censor will deny the access. Without any circumvention tool, the censored client will never be able to reach censored.com. Decoy routing can help the client to evade the censor. Therefore, a decoy router is placed on the path from the censor to an uncensored target such that the traffic from the censored clients passes through the decoy router. The censored client needs to install a special decoy routing software to use the decoy routing functionality. Instead of directly communicating with the censored target, the client's browser will contact the decoy routing software and tell it to establish a connection to censored.com. The decoy router will now create a tag connection to the uncensored target. The tag can only be realized and read by the decoy router. Additionally, the decoy client adds information about the real target. The decoy router detects the tag and redirects traffic to the censored server. Downstream traffic from censored targets get redirected back to the client and carry the IP information of uncensored.net, tripping the censor into believing the client is connected to uncensored.net. However, if the censor uses advanced traffic analysis that uses traffic characteristics to fingerprint web contents, the censor detects that the current fingerprint does not match the ones of uncensored.net and blocks the communication. To avoid this detection, Slovene introduced a new idea that is based on decoy routing. Therefore, Slovene uses the overt user simulator that contains a browser. This overt browser will be used to communicate with the uncensored or overt target. It establishes HTTPS secured connections and exchanges data with the overt target. To enable a communication with a censored target, both the OUS and the decoy router are extended with a multiplexing and demultiplexing unit. The user browser, now considered as the covered browser, establishes a connection to the OUS using SOX5 messages to establish a connection to the censored target. The multiplexer is responsible for inserting covered data into overt transmissions and vice versa. The connection is tagged and contains the client's TLS key material to enable the relay station to decrypt and re-encrypt the overt transmission. The communication between OUS and the relay station now becomes a multiplex channel. Overt covered upload messages will be attended to overt requests. The relay station splits overt and covered messages and forwards them to their individual target. Downstream traffic from the covered target will replace leaf content in overt downstream messages bytewise. Leaf contents are multimedia data like pictures, video, and audio. Although the idea of Slovene seems to fit the requirements of a modern circumvention tool, the authors left open key challenges that were tackled by Slovene++. The Slovene upload was not stealthy implemented, as it did append covered messages to overt requests and thereby changed the overt upload behavior. Slovene++ uses an HTTP2 header compression on the OUS and its counterpart on the relay station and uses the space gains to place covered upload data, keeping the characteristics of the overt upload. In a Slovene prototype, no covered connection scheduling was implemented. Slovene stored all packets of all covered connections in a single queue for multiplexing. In our tests, this resulted in starvation of connections and lower performance due to aggressive DDoS protection mechanisms implemented by covered targets. We added a queue per connection and scheduled them based on either a first-in, first-out strategy or a sliced round-robin strategy. The third point on the list is related to the OUS overt page loading behavior, which did load the overt page in an endless loop without a pause between two loads. We think this behavior is detectable by a sensor. Slefin++ added thinking time to add idle periods between two overt page loads. This leads to a chainsaw pattern in transmission capabilities. As a last improvement, we added crawling to the OUS, as the Slefin prototype did only load the same overt page over and over again. We believe that the original behavior is detectable as well by a sensor, while crawling will do a better job to stay under the radar.
All right, and we introduced two placement strategies for decoy routing systems. The first strategy is a central deployment, and the second one is an autonomous deployment. So the first deployment that we study is what we call the central deployment. And in this case, there is a central decision maker for the decoy routing system, right? So there's some guy, there's some organization who has some finite amount of money, so he has some budget for deploying a decoy routing system. And this guy, depending on which autonomous system is a better fit for running this decoy routing system, will spend this budget to kind of pay some of the autonomous systems on the internet to deploy the decoy routing system, right? So this guy has a budget. He will pay a selected number of autonomous systems, and these autonomous systems will be decoy routers. All right, and this kind of deployment strategy is kind of similar to how many of today's circumvention systems work. So like in Tor or VPNs, there's a central authority who has some finite budget collected, I don't know, through NGOs or some government funding, and it will use that funding to have a central deployment of a circumvention system, right? So the central deployer is our first player in this game, and the second player in the game is a sensor who is able to perform the routing around decoy decisions per BGP routes of traffic. Now let's talk about the second business model for deploying decoy routers, and this is what we call an autonomous deployment. In this case, there's no central authority for kind of selecting the decoy autonomous systems and for paying them to become decoy routers. Instead, every autonomous system on the internet will decide for themselves whether it's good for their economic interest to become a decoy router or not, right? So like each of the routers, each of these autonomous systems, like 50,000 autonomous systems, will have to decide for themselves whether it makes economical sense for them to become a decoy autonomous system or not, right? So suppose that some of these perhaps decide to become decoy ASs, and perhaps many other find it too costly for them or not beneficial for them to become autonomous systems, right? And this kind of decoy deployment is something that hasn't been discussed before, and in some sense is similar to how many kind of distributed network protocols work today. So like things like routing protocols or DNS, essentially these are run by kind of autonomous entities, and everyone acts in order to kind of maximize their economical interest, right? So we have N players, which are the autonomous systems, and we also have the same sensor player as the first game. So in this game, we have N+1 players who will make a decision about how to move forward with this decoy routing system.
So the goal of our work is to design a decoy routing system which provides protection against the routing around decoys attack. Okay, so to see how we do this, let's look a little deeper in a decoy routing system. So the connection from a user to the overt destination has two paths, an upstream path shown on the right and a downstream path. And and a decoy routing system expects there to be a decoy AS on the upstream path of the user to the overt destination, so that this decoy AS, which is hosting decoy routers, can intercept the packet and extract the covert message. As we saw, unfortunately, this is easily avoided by the sensors. They can just simply avoid sending traffic through routes which contain decoy ASs. But a key observation to make here is that although the sensors can modify the upstream traffic fairly easily, they don't have much control on where the downstream traffic is coming from. So if we could have a decoy routing system design which expects there to be a decoy router on the downstream path, this RAT attack couldn't be applied to such a system. So we introduced the notion of downstream-only decoy routing, which is a decoy routing system which only expects there to be a decoy router on the downstream path. And so the typical RAT attack won't apply on such a system, but there are still attacks that the sensors can use to modify or affect the downstream paths. So let's see what those can be. The first one is a source block attack. So assuming that a sensor can, with certain accuracy, tell what path a received downstream packet has gone through, he can drop that packet if he identifies that a packet has gone through a decoy AS in its downstream path. Of course, this attack is going to be very costly for the sensors because essentially they would be blocking any destination on the internet which has a decoy router on its downstream path. And to see how costly this is, we did some simulations. So in this graph, you could see the amount of unreachability of the internet the sensors would have to accept in order to block a decoy routing system with a given number of decoys deployed. The top line is for the source block attack applied on downstream routers, and the bottom line is a typical RAT attack applied on previous upstream routers. And so you could see that a downstream decoy routing systems with only a single decoy router would impose the same amount of unobservability on the sensors as with an upstream decoy router with about 50 decoy routers. The second type of attack that sensors can apply on downstream decoy routing systems is a rewiring attack. And so the idea of this attack is that for example, in this figure, the censoring region is accepting downstream traffic from two ASs, the yellow ASs. And if one of these ASs contains lots of decoyed routes, they could stop advertising their routes and the routes that they are advertising to these ASs and start advertising them to ASs which don't contain lots of decoyed routes. So again, this is going to be more costly than the previous RAT attack. And to see the effect it would have on the sensor, for example, using 10 decoy routers, the RAT attack would only require the sensors to reroute 5% of the internet, whereas this rewiring attack would require them to reroute about 80% of the internet and still have more unreachability than the RAT attack would. So we saw that downstream-only decoy routing systems provide more resilience to routing attacks than upstream decoy routing systems.